Hi everyone, welcome to Social Class and Educational Attainment screencast this week. We're looking at external factors, primarily cultural deprivation. Apologies if my voice, etc. and background noise is a bit dodgy, but they've changed the computer in the room that I do the videos and it's not picking up the sound as well. The learning focus that we're going to be looking at, well, the bigger picture is the patterns and reasons behind differences within classes. We're going to look at external factors and also internal factors, so that's within the schools and outside of schools. This week we're going to look at primarily outside of school. We're going to define social class, we're going to identify explanations for social class differences, and we're going to analyse in class the effects on educational achievement. There's a list of keywords that I want you to do. Please include them in your glossary. Find out what the definition is for all of these. It's going to be very important for the next few weeks that you understand what these words are. Right, first of all, what is social class? Well, some sociologists say that's basically what your parent occupation is when you're kind of born. So if your parents have white-collar jobs such as working in offices, accountants, doctors, lawyers, things like that, then you're classed as middle class. If your parents work in unskilled jobs or semi-skilled jobs, there might be painters and decorators, bricklayers, cleaners, work in factories, things like that, then generally you are classed as working class. Issue with that is, if you think about David Beckham, is he working class? You'd probably say not, but if you take it by his parent occupation, he is. Why does it matter then what your class is? Well, some sociologists say that your background's got a major influence and impact on how good you are in the education system. Children from middle class families tend to do a lot better in education than children from working class backgrounds, and the older you get, the bigger these differences are. And as I say, what we're going to look at this week and next week is the idea about things outside of school impacting, and then the week after that we'll be looking at the actual school and educational establishments themselves and what impact they have. So, cultural deprivation. Theorists who believe in cultural deprivation argue that these are the very basic kind of things that you have, such as values, attitudes, the basic skills to help you get through education. And you pick these up through primary socialisation. So these cultural deprivation theorists believe that working class families aren't equipping their children with these kind of skills during primary socialisation, and this leads on to the fact that they grew up culturally deprived, so they lack all of the essential equipment needed to succeed in school. So there's an idea, I suppose, that if you were born into a working class family, then you're more or less destined to fail. It's broken into three different categories. The first of all is this idea of intellectual development. So this is the idea that through primary socialisation, things that you do at home, you learn all of the skills needed to develop your intellect, and this is what you need to be successful at school, especially at an earlier age. Arguments that working class homes don't have the kind of books or toys or activities that stimulate this educational development. So they are very basic things, or the toys might not be, say, building blocks, it's action figures, as opposed to building blocks or Legos or things where you've actually got to use your brain a little to kind of work out jigsaws and things like that. Douglas in 1964 found that these children from working class backgrounds tended to do worse on tests than children from middle class backgrounds, and he argues that it's working class parents who are impacting on these children, because they're less likely to support the children's intellectual ability, because they won't read with them, or they won't do time-consuming educational activities, because it does take up a lot of time and resource to do jigsaws and to play with these games where it's building up their intellect. It's a lot easier, some would say, for parents to push them away and give them a toy to play with, which maybe doesn't have that interaction. Bernstein and Young, they also kind of back up this idea a few years later and say that middle class mothers tended to choose toys that were more intellectual, so books and games that were there to help develop and stimulate the child's intellectual development. Bernstein and Simmons more recently say that this definitely remains true today, and that it's the parents who often have the greatest impact on whether or not a child does well in school. The second thing that we look at, and it's Bernstein who picks up on this, but it's based on the work of Burita and Engelman, who say that language is deficient in lower classes, and because of this, that results in a failure to develop the skills needed in education. A lot of sociologists believe that education, schools is a middle class environment, and working class and lower class children are not developing the skills, the language needed to be able to operate effectively in school. Bernstein, just under 10 years later. So Bernstein's study finds that restricted code is very much an informal everyday language, and it tends to be used more by working class, but there is also a restricted middle class code as well. This is very informal everyday language. It could be slang or very local words. It's very limited in its explanation, so it doesn't really go into a lot of detail. And it's the kind of language you would use when you're talking to your friends or your family, or in a very informal setting. You don't really think about whether or not it's grammatically correct. So for instance, as I keep getting told off by Angie, the word use isn't grammatically correct, but it's used, and it's not necessarily something that's looked upon badly, unless it was in an educational establishment. I wouldn't have expected really to stand up in front of a class and say use if I was teaching you. Now, the elaborate code is typically used by middle class, and this is where the difference is. Although restricted code is for all classes, elaborate code is more for middle and upper classes. It has a wider vocabulary, so it's got more words, and it's got words with greater meaning and greater depth. These tend to be used in lessons and textbooks and exams, so hence the thought that schools are a middle class institution. It's very business and work orientated, so if you were in an interview, you would be expected to use this kind of language. It's very explanatory and detailed, and it goes into a lot more detail than restricted code. You might have heard the term, why use 10 words when 1,000 will do? Well, elaborate code is like that. It goes into very much detail, and it's very precise in what it's telling you. So why is language so important? As mentioned, elaborate code gives the middle class a bit of advantage because schools, teachers, etc., exams use elaborate code. Primary socialization teaches you this. Middle class children then feel more at home in education because this is the kind of language they're using at home with their parents. If you were learning slang and very restricted language at home, then you're going to really struggle. You're going to have to learn this language basically at school, so you're already on the back foot. So it's not just at home, but it's also the school's fault for using that type of language and not accommodating those who may not be from that type of background. Some criticisms of Bernstein's theory, and that is very generalizing. It presumes that everyone from middle class has the same language. Well, what about those from lower ends of middle class and those who are higher middle class? Their backgrounds are going to be very much different. So there's this generalization that everyone has the same idea. Rossin believes that there's this a myth of superiority, and that there's few examples to actually back up the theory that elaborate and restricted code play that much of a difference in educational success. And Labov also is critical of this idea that working class speech is inferior to middle class, and that is a very elitist viewpoint to have, and that just because you have restricted code doesn't mean that you can't achieve educationally, and it's more to do with the school's failure to teach them than anything to do with your class or your background. Error on the slide, that says number 2, attitudes and values. It should say number 3, attitudes and values. So the third thing when it comes to cultural deprivation is attitudes and values. And Douglas is keen to point out here that parents have a very important role, and it's their attitudes and values towards education, towards their own educational experiences and also the education of their children and how much they want them to progress. Bernstein is saying that disinterested parents have a bigger impact on their child's ability to succeed than any financial hardships. But you could come from a very poor family, but if your parents are really investing in your education and care about it and willing to help you regardless of your financial background, then you can succeed. It is more to do with parents' attitudes towards schools, and that they maybe see that these middle class institutions is a negative thing and they don't support or motivate or even discipline their children as a result. Cultural deprivation theorists believe that all of this helps children fall into like a subcultural value, and very much a subcultural value of education, and that they fall from the mainstream culture. So underachieving or working class children have their own different goals and beliefs. So they might, getting through the day without getting detention might be the main thing for these types of children, as opposed to achieving educational excellence, which is the goals and values that is held predominantly by middle class children. Hyman believes that, with this view that the lower class fall within a subculture, there's a self-imposed barrier to education. So just because you're from a poorer background and your parents don't actually care about education, it means that it's a self-imposed barrier. It's nothing to do with your educational ability. It means the choices you make and the values you hold are the things that's stopping you from educational and career success later on down the line. Very much linked to something we're going to look at in a few weeks' time about labelling and the self-fulfilling prophecy, and the idea that if you aren't going to succeed and you don't belong somewhere, then you're not actually going to try to achieve that. Barry Sugarman in 1970 looked at the idea of subcultures and believes that there was 4 types of subculture within education, and that fatalism and that idea that where whatever will be, if I fail, I fail, if I do well, I do well. There's very much a working class viewpoint in the eyes of Sugarman, and that middle class values are normally about you can change your future through your own effort and work hard. Collectivism is the second one, and that's part of being a group and viewing the group that you want to be in and succeeding as part of a group rather than an individual. So the whole sheep thing, so if your mates are mucking around and carrying on, then you're going to do that rather than stand out and try to actually achieve yourself. Immediate gratification is all about that instant reward. So education's quite a long-term thing, and middle class values tend to be on the work that I do now is for the success in the future, where working class, and particularly modern day where everything is instant, they want that immediate gratification, so they want to know that if they pass, they fail straight away. It's not a long-term thing. And the final thing that Sugarman looks at is this present time orientation, where they see the present only, and that's more important than the future, and they don't have long-term goals. So it might just be the end of the week or the next assignment, as opposed to what I'm going to do in 10, 15 years time with my life. But why do these things occur? Well, Sugarman suggests, as do other theorists, that this all comes down to the types of jobs that working class and middle class people might go into, and working class jobs are very much less secure, and they don't have much in terms of career progression, where you can progress and advance. So you think, well, what's the point in trying? And also the idea about the parents pass on their values to the children, and if parents have those values about, well, society is bad for us, then why should we bother, then that will pass on to the children as well. This is backed up by some more modern theories there, Harry and Francis and Soda and Margot in 2010 each. For the lesson, what I need you to do is obviously bring your notes from this video. I need you to have organised your file for education, if that's separate to the family and household one, and I need you to bring with you your family and households file with all of the changes that I talked about in the lesson last week, and also in the email that I sent you on Tuesday, I think it was. See you all next week. Goodbye.